Hi, I'm Dorian Lamb, and welcome to Start with the Close in Mind. As an owner of a title company and a seasoned real estate professional, I've seen firsthand how focusing on the close is the key to getting the results you want. What I've learned over the years is that this principle doesn't just apply to real estate, it applies to business, strategy, and life. Each episode, I'll share the tools, insights, and real world experiences, both the wins and the lessons learned, that have helped me and others achieve our goals. I will also bring on some of the most successful business minds across industries to uncover how they approach deals, decisions, and success by starting with the close in mind. Welcome to Start with the Close in Mind. Let's dive in. All right. Welcome to Start with the Close in Mind with a very dear friend, Andreas Panagos, the co-founder and partner of GKAP Development, a New York-based real estate development firm. Welcome, Andreas.
Hey, Dorian, thanks for having me.
Anything about your background you want to include before we start our discussion?
Yeah, so I think with GKAP Development, we're a full service real estate development firm. I started back in the residential mortgage business, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago. Worked my way into commercial financing, investment sales, and that led me to development.
Yeah, what I've always found unique about your background is you've covered the main areas of the development cycle, right? And I'll add some context to that. You had a mortgage company, so you understood financing and how to underwrite property. Then you started your own investment sales company where you would advise clients or you would help them find sites. And then now you're a developer, right? So it gives you the background across the board. And it's frankly part of the reason why I think that you really do believe in the start with the close in mind philosophy that we've spoken about and that I've been speaking about. So let's dive into it, right? So you gave us a quick intro about yourself. Why don't we explore what it means to you to start with the close in mind? Not just, the perspective of how I look at it, which is making sure to close your deal, but more from the developer side. Give everyone the developer's state of mind and how you think with the close in mind.
Yeah, so I think at least I always look at the closing first, even post closing, right? So as a developer, the first thing you do is you're looking at your cost, right? And then, what I'll do is I can figure out what the cost is for the site. And then I typically put in 3% for New York recording tax fees, another 2 or 3% for lender's fees, whatever may come at the closing. At that point, I'll order title through you before I even start doing anything. And I'll also ask you, hey, are my numbers correct? Which are usually pretty much on par. And from there, I start underwriting the deals. I do an analysis of the property, where the expected rents are, the expenses. And after that, you kind of take a look and see, okay, does this make sense today? And does it make sense 10 years from now? Once you do that, you figure, okay, where do I get my capital from? And you also want to make sure that everything makes sense so you can close on time. There's no other issues. Those things always pop up. And the quicker you can figure that out, the better.
Yeah. One of the benefits to having experience in doing what we do is now it seems a little obvious to us at times where you can prepare for the common mistake by starting early. And, you are showing that in terms of just how you even think about when you look at a development site. It's creating the framework around understanding what your costs can be, right? So I think I heard closing cost in there. And then not just factoring that in, but creating kind of a picture that you now back into with regards to whether or not it's feasible and then also how it correlates to how you raise capital for it. Can you reflect a little bit about how you do raise capital? Or if I were to ask a more specific question about raising capital, it would be, is there anything that you start with the close in mind with that as well? So two-part question is, number one, how do you raise capital based off of that? And then number two, what are the things that from your experience you've learned that people should think about when they raise capital?
Yeah, so for raising capital, you go into known sources you've used in the past, either individual investors, family offices, you can go to institution, and you kind of figure your capital stack there. At that point, once you know you can actually fund the deal, you're really looking at closing, right? So you have a lender in mind, you have a closing date set, you want to know if there's any hurdles, because the last thing you want to do is figure out, hey, we're closing in 4 months from now. If you're at the closing table the week before, issues arise, it gets pushed off. Well, you already have a loan in process, right? What if you can't extend it? Or what if rates go up? I mean, we've seen that happen a lot the last couple of years. As a developer, you're getting everything lined up, right? So you have your team, you're ready to demolish a building. Let's say you have a building, you may need to do an environmental, get all your permits in place because that loan stock starts ticking the second you close, right? So everything's got to be at closing, everything's got to be done. You can't be delayed for a simple mistake of not looking at title or something silly, not silly like that, but anything else, things that you should know ahead of time in order to close on time.
Yeah, and I know from prior conversations there are certain nuances to even timing when you speak to an investor about raising capital. To be specific, you mentioned taxes and whether or not they file their taxes in the right way is something that could either be indicative of readiness or prohibitive in terms of when they can act. You want to extrapolate on that?
Yeah, so I can one time we had a deal. When we were closing, one of our investors was we were financing one of his properties, pulling cash out of the property, and this was around August. And one of I didn't have that year's tax returns. I said, listen, we're looking to close probably right before October, and just through my history of doing finances in the past, I said, hey, listen, I need to get in touch with your accountant. I need to make sure that those taxes will be done in time. Because if they're not only not going to delay the closing, you're not going to close at all until they're done. I think with that particular investor as well, he also had some federal tax liens that you pointed out, and you told us, hey, you better get a hold of this quick because this takes some time to do. So we did that from the first week. So it wasn't like a few weeks before the closing, which typically I think happens a lot. All of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, we've got this issue, that issue. You need to let anyone involved in the deal what the issues are ahead of time because it takes time and people don't always jump on things you tell them to do from day one. So as long as you know from day one, you follow up, then you have a much smoother closing.
Yeah, we're talking about the nuances of not just raising capital from partners on the limited side, but this is also something that pertains and applies to your general partners potentially in any joint ventures. And
Absolutely.
maybe even more so when it comes to who you partner with. If you are co-GPing or if you're GP or JVing with a landowner, you have to make sure that they're ducks in a row because you're now forming a partnership by which you're going to raise the debt or get further equity.
Yeah, and that does come up a lot in JVs. A lot of times, these are landowners that have owned the property for 40, 50 years, and they don't want to lose the property. They may own a lot of real estate, but I found a lot of times they don't know a lot about real estate, even though they think they do. So a lot of times you're cleaning things up from day one, right? So you're getting the title report, you're going through the finances, you're going through everything. There could be liens from 20 years ago, right? And those older liens I found always take much longer to clear up than something recent, right? And a recent lien's easy to take care of, right? Got a bill from a year ago, no problem. Sit there, you pay it, deal, you're done. But something from 20 years ago, I mean, what if they had a mortgage from 20 years ago that they paid off, right? And we had this come up once, right? And I'm thinking about it. It was paid off, but that lender went out of business and the mortgage still showed up on the property. And we can't close with our construction loan on this property because there's an outstanding loan. But luckily, Peter over at your company took care of it. He knows how to do it because I think it took like 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Something like that to get that cleared up. So you really got to look into JV. So if you're a developer out there, a new developer, or if you're doing a joint venture, get that title work from day one because you're gonna have issues on that.
Yeah, look, there's probably not much more that is more important than a developer getting construction financing. So we certainly don't want to hold that up. Timing is everything, right? And
Yeah.
timing costs money. It's interesting because most are wired to think about due diligence when it comes to the property itself or prior ownership, which obviously is something that is wired directly into anybody who works on title or with closing transactions. It's an interesting take with regards to doing due diligence on your partners as well, where we've been able to help you within that endeavor because in order to get to a point where you have to prepare the entity or the partnership by which is going to go out and get financing, you have to be buttoned up in that end as well. So you have to make sure that you're clearing up the items that are associated with that individual, or at least do the research to know what could be, getting in the way of allowing you to capitalize a project. So, it's really interesting with regards to how you have used those on your team, including myself, on the closing front and the title front. When we talk about costs, right, one of the things that's in the news recently are tariffs. In fact, yesterday was famously Liberation Day. I even put up a post about that. And
most of
Should it
my
be like
knowledge
land
is,
liberation? All right, sounds like it should be French.
yeah, right. But most of what I'm surrounded by are it's anecdotal, right? It's what I hear. But why don't we hear directly from you, who develops, what you believe the tariffs impact will be, especially here in New York, and then what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So it's funny when we're looking at a new project right now and I'm underwriting it. And obviously, this tariff thing has been out in the press for a few weeks now. And last week, when I was underwriting it, yesterday, was it yesterday, the day before was the deadline. So I'm like, hey, we're a week away. Let me underwrite this deal now with a 25% increase in costs because we saw what happened during COVID where costs were up 30%. This isn't typical, but I wanted to be safe. I said, hey, what if this happens, right? Because things always arise during development, right? It's not just when you close, it's post closing and issues. COVID, everybody saw a 30% increase. So I said, hey, I'm not sure what's going to go up, but something could go up. Most likely it will. So I just underwrote the loan with a 25% increase in cost of construction because I'm not sure what's going up, but at least I won't have that issue post closing where all of a sudden my capital lines is lined up. We close on a loan. Next thing you know, oh my God, steel's gone up 25%, right? So that increases your cost, and you want to make sure that the project can survive that. That's what I do. I'm not sure if other developers do that, but I always look that far ahead.
Yeah, look, another version or another way of saying that is it's starting with the end in mind, right? Because you may not know exactly what it is, but in your experience, costs go up. So you should factor that in on all your underwriting where you have, not even a buffer of sorts, but just an added element of the fact that things can be up to 25% more costly for whatever reason that you can't exactly know at that point in time what it could be. You could speculate, but then something can come out of left field, i.e., interest rates, inflation, COVID, tariffs, and it's as a developer, especially with so much on the line, it's just prudent to factor that in no matter what.
How you underwrite a deal without expecting the unexpected, especially the last 5 years. I don't think we've ever seen such volatility. And forget the rest of the world, just development, what we're talking about, right? I'm sure you saw too with people looking to finance at the end of the, you're getting close to closing when the rates shot up. Nobody was expecting that, although I had an inkling. But nobody really was expecting it. All of a sudden, you had all these deals that couldn't close, right? So as a developer, if I've lined everything up and by the time we get to closing, I've already spent a lot of money to get there. Um, it's not just, the financing aspect of it, right? The contract, but you're putting down a down payment, or you're spending money with the team. You have to design the building. So you're spending all this money. And if you go to the closing and everything changes and you didn't, so right, what am I looking for? Forecast,
Excellent.
additional
Yeah.
expenses, right? So you have these additional expenses, and if something's gone up, you're going to kill the entire deal because you weren't prepared. That's shame on you, then.
Yeah, look, I appreciate you focusing on the close because ultimately that's what I represent. I mean, that even extends further to just developing itself as a whole, where as you develop, there's going to be cost factors that you have no control of that are typically going to go up, right? It's quite infrequent that pricing of anything goes down, especially when it comes to development, and the real only controllable lever you have in terms of perhaps making costs go down with air quotes is with the timeline. So the sooner you get it done, the more you would be able to save from a cost perspective.
Timing is probably one of the most important things to a developer,
Yeah.
besides your project. Let's say a project takes you 30 months, right? But if it only takes 30 months to build, but it takes you an additional 6 months to close and get everything else going. You know what's going to happen. The other problem too is at times administrations change, policies change. At least if you're close to closing, everything's in your timeline. You're going to close. Policy is not going to change that quick. Delay too long. New administration comes in, then there's new policies, and the deal may not work out because of new rules and regulations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the life of a developer, right? You guys honestly don't get a fair depiction in the news. It typically is very sensationalized from the perspective of you guys just being kind of these, extremely wealthy individuals that build real estate and are egomaniacs to some extent. But one of the one of the things that is infrequently covered is the amount of risk and stress and anxiety and things that are out of your control that you are, what's the orchestrating, right, to get this thing done? Because between finding the deal, negotiating the deal, capital partners, banks, lenders of all types of sorts, contractors, building, finalizing, interaction with city agencies, stabilizing the actual asset itself, and then there's just so much that goes on. The reason why I'm describing it to this level of detail is because that's a typically 30 plus timeline, 30 plus months timeline where things like administration changes, we think of it just from the presidential standpoint, but even locally, you have the local constituents that are represented by council members and assemblymen and borough presidents here in New York that change. It at times can impact your development, sometimes in a positive way, but also in a negative way.
It does. And, especially with social media now, there's so much coming out there, but it's funny. A lot of times, people bring me a deal and like, oh, I say, well, it's too expensive, and the thought process is, oh, well, you'll make it up in the end. Well, it doesn't work that way for development. If it doesn't make sense now, it's not going to make sense later, and we
Yeah.
talked about all these other roadblocks and issues that come up. But if you're starting with an overpriced property, you already got one foot in the ground. You're done.
Yeah. One of the things I had mentioned, or we were talking about how the political climate can change, right? Another area that is potentially very impactful to you is the incentives that the local state and city provide. And, something that, and this is a little more nuanced to New York, but something that's been in the news recently is the city of Yes. Have you had a chance to look at that? Do you feel, as a developer in the areas that you develop, that it's going to incentivize or help with credits in any way, shape, or form, or zoning? I mean, what's your
Yeah.
overall take of city
So
of Yes?
it works. It's not as good as the previous programs, but at least we have something, because for 2 years there was nothing, because the affordability came out, and then a few months later you had the city of Yes, so they kind of piggybacked on each other, which is great, because no deal made sense. You couldn't really build unless you were doing condos, and we do rentals. So it helps a lot. I do think they have to go back to the drawing board as far as if you can build more than 99 units, but you're not going much more, so you're going up like 150 units, it doesn't really make sense to do it, because if you do anything above 99 units, you need union employees, and then it doesn't pencil out, it gets too expensive. And if you can't do two buildings, so you can only do one, you're losing a lot of that square footage. So it either reflects on a price, you're buying a cheaper price, you only do 99 units, or no one's going to buy that property. And, everybody's talking about it today, right?
Yeah,
You're sitting there, you're like, I want to do it. I can do 150 units, but unfortunately, it's just not, it doesn't make any economic sense to do that building, because you need to bring union employees in, and the cost is too high. I think we're going to see a lot of empty properties sitting there, even though City of Yes got approved. But those, you're right in that little zone, that little area where a lot of these properties aren't going to get done. And I'll give you an example. I'm speaking with a couple of owners on properties, and they don't understand it fully, or like, oh, well, why don't you just do offices or do additional parking, whatever. Well, we know what's going on with offices, right? And most offices don't go into rental buildings, right? So even if you're doing 2 floors of offices, it's kind of weird. If you're doing ground retail, 2 floors of office, and then residential, that doesn't make sense. Additional parking, you don't need the parking. No one's driving the way they used to. So it's just an added expense. So the city's got to go back to the drawing board on that. But if you do have a building that it's just 99 units, City of Yes, it pans out.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be, one thing, developers are always savvy, and they're always going to find, ways to uh, get done what they need to get done from the perspective of development. One of the things that we're seeing that's being covered in the news and the media is that there is this rise of the 99 unit development, and it's mainly to stay below the prevailing wage requirement, which is really expensive from what I understand. And it's very interesting because there's some sites that were approved for 300 or 400 units, and now the feeling is that the prevailing wage is so high that it's actually sensible to divide it into 3 different buildings of 99 units, and have 3 different envelopes and 3 different cores and 3 different executions, and it's still cheaper than going over that mark to pay the prevailing wage.
Yeah, so one of the buildings we're looking at, you can do 2 buildings. So it's great. You can do 2 right next to each other. The other one, there's no, you can't do it.
Yeah.
I think I know the deal you're talking about. Yeah, why wouldn't you do 3 or 4 buildings, right? As long as if it's on a lot, it's a lot of savings. We've already outlined, the unexpected costs to a developer. So if our job is to save money because something always comes up.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something you're highlighting very specifically, is that something always comes up, and it's especially when it comes to cost.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if there's one lesson, and I know you have many lessons in your experience, but if there is one lesson, is factoring costs and the fact that it's going to go up and that there's going to be costs that you're not expecting that are going to hit you when you start your project.
Honestly, it's the cost is, it's all the outside factors. Once you got your foot in the ground, you're digging, at least for us, and we have a great team. That's the least of my concern. It's pre-closing and completion of the project, right? Because the other problem you have too, when you're done with the project, you have all these agencies that have to come in and give you an approval, and it's a timing on their part. But in the middle, when we're building, that's my favorite part because it's the quietest part, believe it or not.
So why don't we dive into some of the things that you've already mentioned? You just mentioned collaboration with professionals, obviously partners on your deal. What are some of the things through your experience with development here in New York that are top of mind for you when you seek out partners in your deal, not just from the capital perspective, but your general contractors, your title companies, your attorneys, your brokers? Like what are some of the common elements that you're looking for, that you've learned, that you can put under the ethos of start with the close in mind?
Sure. So I look for people who are great at their jobs, who can deliver, get things done on time. That goes from attorneys, because there's good and bad attorneys, there's good and bad brokers, there's good and bad lenders, right? There's lenders who will work with you, there's lenders who won't. And title companies, well, we just use you. But I mean, in the
Easy to
past,
bind you.
years ago, we've used other ones. Like what's great about you guys is we get a title report. You're going to send it over right away, and then if you see something pop up, you'll say, "Hey, Andreas, take a look at this. This may be an issue." Because when we do get the title report, it's not the first thing we're open, especially when we're putting everything together. You do have time, but when you do point out there's an issue, then you know what? That's it. I go right to the title report and I look at it, right? And it's important because at times attorneys don't look at the title report to the last week before the closing, maybe even the day before, right? So, I'm depending on the title company to tell me things. And if I have an issue, it's a lot quicker if I pick up the phone or shoot you an email and say, "Hey, Dorian, what's this?" Because the one thing I'm not well versed on is title. Sure, I know enough of things, but it's the one thing that I'm not well versed on overall, is all the nuances of title. That's, and you're great at that. So I'll be like, "Hey, what's this?" Or, "I don't know. I've never heard of this." Right. But I know you'll get to it right away. Where if I go to an attorney, especially if it's not that important, we're not closing it for a while, and this isn't for every attorney, but some attorneys may just let it sit there and, fester for a while. Right. So um, when it's an attorney that it could be one of my clients, one of my investors' attorneys, right? They'll definitely they've always taken their time. So, all of a sudden that sits there, we'll have to remind them, but then it's an issue, right? You want to get it done right away. So you see the importance of having an attorney who'll do it, or a title company like you guys who point things out and we get it out of the way. Because what we were saying earlier, right? Do you really want to worry about a title issue 2 days before you close? I mean, to me, that's the dumbest thing ever, right? You have the title report way, way ahead of time. And then I guess, I'm sure you see this, right? It just sits there. And,
Yeah.
people, yeah. Next thing you know, day of closing. "Hey, Dorian, can you take care of this?" Or, "What's this?" Right? That's people who aren't thinking of the closing.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. Obviously, you wouldn't directly use an attorney that wouldn't look at a title report until a week or two or a day before the closing. But you do bring up a good point, where sometimes your partners, they come from all different walks of life, and they may feel that they have a family attorney that's more of a general practice attorney that
Yeah.
is not as familiar with real estate at the level that they need to be, and in that instance, they may take the title report for granted, or anything that would qualify under the findings of some research on due diligence side for title related items. But you are astute in the sense where, reflect on this, and this is directly start with the close in mind. But you don't wait to run a title report or you don't wait rather to sign a contract before you run a title report. I know you're one of the guys that's out there that practices running title and getting your title team involved, closing team involved early, and actually running all this stuff when you're looking at the site. That way you have a bigger picture of what you're potentially are stepping into. And I recognize that at times it can actually give you a reason to walk away from the deal. But I mean, just think about how much time you saved with regards to potentially going into the deal, spending months on it, and then finding out later on and just walking away from the deal anyway from something that you could have learned earlier on.
Yeah, you need to, right? I mean, I think I walk away from 99.5% of the deals I look at, right? For whatever reason. And the title's a big help. I mean, listen, you may be looking to buy a property, not even a joint venture, and you take a look at the title report. I take a look at ownership. One, do I know them? Two, maybe it's a bank owned, but three, most importantly, maybe there's a bunch of partners or it's a family, right? And what I typically find is when it's partners or families, there's usually an issue. So you want to butt that right away. You want to make sure if you get in the contract that both sides are agreed on and they get along, because if they don't, you could be in a contract on a property, you throw your deposit, you do all this work, and then all of a sudden the two partners can't agree on the closing, and then you're just stuck in a legal battle trying to get your money back, or maybe they give you your money back, but now you're at the beginning. You did all that work. You spent months and months and money on a
Yeah.
project, and it didn't close not because of you, but because of the seller. So if you can sit there and get rid of some of those issues, you're not going to have to worry about it. And for developers, that's really important, especially when you want to close on a property and you can't because it's something the other side didn't do, right?
Yeah, look, there's already the saying of money is time, and time is essentially the most important thing that we all have just as humans, right? But
Yeah.
from the development standpoint, it stands very true, and the costs are very high with regards to pursuit of a deal that ends up not working out for something that you could have learned earlier on, or just cost overall. When you talk about costs, I mean you're talking about a lot of money that's expended on due diligence. I've seen people put in $250,000 on deals only to have to walk away from it.
Incredible.
That's obviously a tough pill to swallow. So let's begin to start wrapping up here. What are the direct insights that you would offer to developers or young developers out there, or anyone that is listening to this from the perspective of understanding how to go about being a better developer?
I think for young developers or maybe old school developers, where and I say this because times have changed a lot recently, and I get that sometimes it's hard to catch up to what's going on because the world changes very rapidly today. And for newer developers, leave no stone unturned, because especially for the newer ones, if you do something and you think you can worry about it tomorrow, you can't. You have to worry about tomorrow today, otherwise your deal's going to have a lot of holes and you may lose the entire project. So,
Yeah.
have that mindset, everything we spoke about, right? We laid the groundwork out of what you need to do to close on the developer side. And you've got Dorian here on title, who, what? He's a great ear. He's worked with a lot of developers. I've worked with Dorian for years. We've known each other for God knows how long now, right? But he's a great resource. Ask questions. And Dorian, if you're new, ask Dorian a question and he'll come to a developer like me and say, hey, I've got this new developer. He's got this question, pick up the line, or can you give me an answer so I could tell him? I'll gladly do it. Don't be afraid to ask, and best of luck.
Yeah, look, I always appreciate you as a friend just in general, and then even more so now for the relentless plugs. But the lesson is, make sure that the people on your team are people who are contributing to helping you be successful from the perspective of closing not just on time, but preparation rather, in terms of just getting some insight very early on with regards to sites that you look at. Have your team be familiar with it rather than, say, in the traditional circumstance, which is that a title company, since we're talking about title, isn't really engaged until the contract is signed. And then, there's a lack of familiarity between, what's actually happening, especially in development, right? That there's lots being perhaps that were assembled or that are being assembled, that there's development rights or zoning lots that need to be, factored in. If we're involved earlier on, it's a much easier transition as we read the title report and then make determinations on that, versus being brought in later and then having to either play catch up or maybe not even be told what the situation is with regards to the development site itself, and then really being behind the curve. But the bigger lesson, from the start with the close in mind, podcast and just ethos and philosophy is that you should always prepare, for the end, right? Why be unprepared, right? But always work with people who are being helpful up front rather than later for a particular reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Use the resources you have. You need it. And maybe that, I think that's why at times you see development sites stall or they never start because they don't think of the close. Because I know when I look at projects that don't make sense, they may sit there for 5, 10 years, just empty lot. Like one of the first deals I wanted to do, that property, no one's developed on that lot yet. It's flipped twice. The contract's been sold twice. 3 different developers went into it, and no one's broken ground yet.
All right. So I always like to wrap up on the key takeaways, and if there's another way of saying it, is what are the principles by which you develop by? So if you want to leave the audience with regards to the things that you keep in mind in terms of how do you start with the development in mind, right?
Yeah. I really look at what the development. I look at what the development's gonna be 10 years from now, right? Because I feel like I don't develop buildings. I develop future-proof investments, right? So if I do all the groundwork beforehand, I know what I'm looking at 10 years from now, and that's the most important thing for a long-term hold developer.
I like that. I like that you develop in that way, and that you're thinking of that end in mind, right? You're thinking 10 years ahead. So you're really developing to secure an investment or a financial opportunity versus developing for the sake of just developing because you want to be known as a real estate developer and have a hard asset. That's great, man. Andreas, I always appreciate your time, your insight. What are the ways that the audience can find you if they want to touch base with you?
Yeah, they can go over to our website, GKAP Development Group. Shoot us over an email from there, or they can reach out to you.
Yeah, so that's a GKAP Development. You can find Andreas there. I know that Andreas is active on LinkedIn as well. And as always, you could reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to make a connect to Andreas. But with that said, we're going to wrap up. Andreas, thank you again. And we hope to see the audience again soon. Thank you.